Good evening, everybody. So we are very happy to welcome you to the English Without Borders uh, webinar series, which we usually traditionally uh, hold on Thursday evenings. So we are very happy to see all of you, and people will be joining us via Zoom link and also on Facebook Live. And today we are double excited to host our next speaker, Lara Ravitch. She's online with us, and welcome, Lara, to our English Without Borders webinar series. And we are very happy to host you. Just to tell you some information about our speaker today, please be aware and be informed that Laura is going to talk about experiential language learning in children's camps. And we are very delighted to inform that Lara Ravitch is a senior instructor at the American English Institute at the University of Oregon and has been a language camp director for over 15 years. And she holds 2 master's degrees in teaching foreign languages and special education. And in addition, she has worked as a language teacher and program administrator in a variety of contexts in the US and abroad. Lara regularly leads online training courses for participants from around the world and has served as an English language specialist in Bolivia and as a peer mentor for English language camp directors in Russia. Her topics of interest include experiential language learning, language assessment, identity in the language classroom, and supporting the language learners with disabilities. So Lara, we are very happy and excited to host you. And now we are giving the floor to you. Dear participants, please, you can also use this opportunity to ask your questions to our speaker using the chat box and comment box on Facebook and chat box on Zoom. So thank you very much, Lara. Now the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nasiba. I'm excited to be here with all of you and participate in English Without Borders. This is a great opportunity, and I look forward to getting to know you all and your context a little bit better today. Thank you, Nasiba, Niso, Gonoro, for your great support today with this workshop. So I'll be talking today about experiential language learning in children's camps. And so I'm just going to share my screen with you. There we go. I love teaching language. I don't know about all of you. I assume you do, or we wouldn't be doing this, right? And one of the things that I love the most about it is making it fun. With language, we can do just about anything. Language covers all of our lives. And so there's no reason not to make it fun and exciting and engaging. And experiential language learning and children's camps are both ways to really increase engagement and fun and lower anxiety. So this is why this is one of my favorite topics, because I think it's a way of making language learning engaging and accessible for everyone. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, I have been teaching English for over 20 years, the last 10 years of which are at the University of Oregon. And I have been running a summer language program for quite some time as well, but that is over here in the state of Minnesota. So every summer I travel across the country to run a language immersion summer camp. As you can see, it's in the woods in these log cabin buildings in a very nice and relaxing atmosphere. And the camp that I run is actually a Russian language immersion camp. But I work with English language camp directors from around the world as a teacher, leading professional development seminars, and as a peer mentor. So I'm interested in what you think about when you think about summer camp. So if you could take a minute to write in the chat, have you ever been to summer camp? When you think of summer camp, what do you think of? And we'll take a look here at the chat. Good evening, everyone. It's early morning my time. Has anyone been to summer camp? Okay, someone has been to camp in Samarkand. You think about recreation. No time in any camp. So you think about camps as fun, but you haven't necessarily been to one. Youth Camp for Democracy. Spending vacation in a camp. So it seems like some of you have had some time in camp. Some haven't. Oh, always envied those who were in one. And we have an idea that it's really fun, right? That's sort of what we think about. Even if we haven't been to the camp, we have this idea that children are having fun, right? And I think sometimes that's the reality. Sometimes it doesn't always turn out the way that we hope it will. But there's this idea that it should be fun, right? And I actually pulled these photos from online photos of camps that run in Tajikistan. So if you haven't had a chance to be there, there are some possibilities, and some of them actually are English camps too. Oh, when you were a pupil, your sister went to camp and you cried so much because you missed your sister, or because you were jealous about her time at camp, I wonder. So we're going to talk a little bit about the possibilities of summer camp for language education. And for me, the biggest possibility that we can realize at language camp, so much more than we can in the classroom, although you can a little bit in the classroom. And if you don't have a chance to ever teach at a language camp, you can realize some of these suggestions in the language classroom. But I think at camps, we have a much bigger opportunity for that. And this all revolves around experiential learning. So first, we need to talk about what is experiential learning. And of course, experiential learning is about experiences. You can see that in the word. And it's not a new idea. Experiential learning has been around for several decades and is defined as the process by which knowledge is created through the transformation of experience. So it's not enough just to have an experience, but you have to take that experience and turn it into knowledge. So how do we do that? We do it through this cycle, which has 4 parts, and you can start anywhere in the cycle. So for example, if we start with concrete experience up at the top of our cycle here, something happens to you, you do something. Right? And you start there and we follow the arrows around in the circle. The next step would be to reflect or observe, right? What happened to me? What is this that just happened, right? And then following the arrow around in the circle again, we get to abstract conceptualism. So I've had this experience, I've thought about it, and now I'm forming some ideas about what that tells me about the world. What is the bigger point of all of this? What can I learn from it? And then once we get that idea, that moves us to the next stage of active experimentation. Okay, I think this is what's going on. I think this is why I had this experience. I think this is what came into this experience. And now I'm going to test it and see whether that's really true. And the cool thing about the experiential learning process is that you can start anywhere in that cycle. So I gave an example starting with concrete experience, but you could start with the abstract conceptualism, right? You could start, this is the way it happens in science a lot, right? I have a theory, I want to test it. So you start with your concept, your theory, you move around to active experimentation, do some experiments, see what happens, right? That's the concrete experience, right? You do the experiments and something happens. What happens? Your concrete experience. And then you have a chance to reflect on that. Did it match my hypothesis? or was it different? So you can start anywhere in that cycle. Now, when we think about experiential learning, it may be obvious how this applies to science, for example, right? You think about doing an experiment in a laboratory. Of course, it looks a little like this. But what does it look like if we are doing language learning, right? This may not seem obvious. Well, if we are going to use experiential learning for languages, first, of course, we need to start with our objectives, right? As any good teacher, we know that we shouldn't just go out there and teach whatever we want to teach. First, we should think what the students need to learn and then figure out how to teach it. So with experiential language learning, we're going to have two kinds of objectives. We have communicative objectives. And if you look down at the bottom of this chart, you see that we have in communicative objectives, we have terminal objectives that include comprehension, right? We want students to be able to understand. Negotiation, we want them to be able to go back and forth in a dialogue or conversation. And production, right? We might want them to be able to give presentations or be able to write. So we want to think about those communicative objectives just the way we do with any other kind of language learning. But what we add on top of this is the experiential objective. So we don't just want them to be able to communicate, but we also want them to have some knowledge about a skill or content. We want them to have certain behaviors that they've learned or certain attitudes. We want things that are coming out of this experience that aren't only about language learning. So let's look a little bit more closely at what those experiential objectives might look like at camp. So at camp, even though when we think about camp, we think about fun and we think about how we wanted to go to camp as a kid and we didn't have a chance, or how we did go to camp as a kid and some of it was fun for us and the games we like to play. The purpose of camp is actually about positive youth development, right? And whether the camp is in Tajikistan or in the US or in Brazil, there's always some aspects of youth that we want to develop, right? So there are several aspects of this. There's physical development and intellectual development, psychological and emotional development, and social development. So if we have a language learning camp, we don't only want to teach language, but as a camp, we want to develop the whole child in all of these different ways. And we need all of these parts in order to achieve our objectives in a camp. So when we talk about the experiential objectives for language learning in a youth camp, we want to make sure that those experiential objectives are aligned with these important things that we want to develop in our youth. So what does that look like? Well, it can look a lot of different ways. But before you put it into practice, you need to make sure that you are maximizing the benefits and removing some drawbacks, right? So I'm interested, what do you think might be the benefits of this approach to include language learning alongside experiences that build physical, intellectual, emotional, and social skills? What do you think might be some benefits? You can go ahead and type in the chat. So you think there may be emotional benefits to the kids? Yeah. To be able to develop in that way while they're at camp. Independence is one of the emotional skills that we see develop in kids at camp a lot. Okay, so a lot of folks recognizing the emotional strengths and strengthening the language knowledge. Yeah, when we integrate it with those other important aspects of youth development, and we do those things hand in hand, it can strengthen the language knowledge. It's not just something that's abstract. It's not even just a tool. When it's part of your development as a human being, it can be stronger, definitely. All right, great ideas. However, there are also some drawbacks. Do you have any ideas of what might be the drawbacks of trying to teach language through experiences, um, and not just working with the language itself in detail? I'll give you some ideas about the drawbacks in just a minute. So, first of all, the benefits. Oh, we have some in the chat now. Okay, great. A competition, yeah, definitely. So if you have different teams trying to do different things, then people could feel maybe more stress from competition. That could be hard. Bullying, yeah. When emotions are involved with bullying or social activity, the social dynamics become more important. It can confuse them when they're trying to integrate the experience in the language. Absolutely. I think that can be a big challenge. And remembering what they have learned. Sometimes they're having so much fun and getting carried away by the experience, and they might not remember what they're learning from the language. Those are great, great ideas, everyone. Those are all really definitely things that we do see as drawbacks sometime. And additional stress from having to know not just language, but also use that language to have some kind of experience. Yes, really great, great contributions. So, in terms of what the literature says about the benefits and the drawbacks, um, one of the benefits is a clear communicative context. So, if you are having some experience, there is a reason that you need to use the language. If you're going and buying things at a store, you have to use the language to get the things you want. If you're doing a science experiment, you need to use the language to make the experiment happen, right? So it provides a clear communicative context. It provides motivation. If you want to build your rocket ship and launch it, you are motivated to use the language. It can increase self efficacy, particularly in students who may not be as strong language learners. If they have strengths in other areas related to the experience they're having, that could make them feel more confident. It teaches them new skills. So they can learn anything from archery to canoeing to different kinds of crafts. Um, uh, in the US, many of the students who come to our camp are very wealthy and don't have experience doing their own laundry, for example. But they come to camp and we teach them how to do their own laundry, and we teach it alongside teaching the language. So this is a very valuable skill now that they can go home and their parents say, "Oh my goodness, my child can help with the laundry now. This is so exciting." So they can learn important new skills. Um, and of course, group work can be a benefit. They learn to work well with others. And in the context of camp, because you have the children for a long period, either a day, so if you have a day camp, some city camps are, from morning till evening, where you sort of have control over their whole day. Or if it's an overnight camp, you have them for a week or 2 weeks. So you can really work on these things. Whereas if you have them in English class for only 40 minutes a day, or an hour a day, um, it's harder to work on the skills for how to work as a group, right? You really want to move forward to the language teaching, and it's hard to take the time to support teaching new skills and group work. So this is one of the reasons that the summer camp environment can help to maximize the benefits. The drawbacks, though, sometimes if the skill is very difficult or they get too motivated to just accomplish the task, they will engage in too much L1 use, right? They get very excited to build their rocket and they have trouble staying in English. Sometimes the linguistic demands are too high and can be frustrating. I think somebody mentioned frustration and stress. If you can't tell your teammates about how to do the experience, that might be stressful. It can take a lot of time to set up these projects and make them happen. It can be hard to figure out how to assess them. What if something went wrong with the student's experience, but it's not about their language? How do you find a way to carefully assess their language separate from the experience? And then I'm also including group work as a drawback because we know that when group work goes well, it can be very helpful. But when it goes badly, it can be really a bad experience for students and not helpful for their learning. So we really have to be prepared to support group work and make it a positive experience in order for this to work well. So it's important to be aware of these benefits and drawbacks before you go into experiential language learning so you can make sure that you are setting up a situation where the linguistic demands are not too high, make sure you have the right amount of time for the project, that you understand how to assess it, and you are ready to design good group work. Of course, I could do a presentation on each one of these points. We're not going to talk about all of them in detail, but they're all things to think about when you're doing experiential language learning. So now you're probably wondering, you have learned so much about experiential language learning, but maybe you want to see an example. Yeah, what does an experiential language curriculum look like? So at camp, I think there's really two possibilities for how to have experiential language learning. And one of them is through this experiential language curriculum. So typically at a language camp, you'll have some time each day that is language class, right? Probably more time in language class than you would spend at a regular school, but probably not your whole day. You'll do lots of different activities, but one of them for an hour or two might be something very focused on language. So this is an example of a class, like a language class, and how to make it more experiential. And then we'll see a second option of approaching experiential language learning at camp in a different way. So here is our experiential language curriculum. If you want to make your curriculum experiential, you want to take modules, parts of your curriculum, and you want to make sure that they're set up in this kind of cycle. You want to make sure that students are exposed to an experience. They have the opportunity to participate in the experience. They have a chance to internalize the experience, really understand it for themselves, and a chance to disseminate what they've learned, right? We all know that if we have a chance to teach something to others, that helps us to learn it more. So when you create your experience, you want to make sure that it has these 4 steps. So when we designed our experiential language curriculum at the camp where I work, we decided that we wanted the experience to be a visit to the target language country. So we thought to ourselves, what experiences might a person have when they're visiting another country, when they're traveling, when they're staying with other people? So take a moment in the chat and tell me your ideas. What's an experience you might have when you visit a new place, when you travel, when you stay with other people? What are some experiences you might have? Sightseeing, yep, you might take a trip around the town, look at all of the sights, meeting new people, very good. Eating out, going to a restaurant, seeing new elements of the culture, yep, new food. Yeah, these are great examples. So when we designed our curriculum, these are exactly the things that we chose. So one day we would, the students would have an experience all about eating at a restaurant. Another day, the experience might be taking a tour of the town. Different weather. Oh, that's a good one. We didn't use that one, but I like it. One of the things that's great about doing an experience around travel to another country is you can also include unexpected events. So different weather would be a great one, where you could start out maybe having the experience of a city tour, but suddenly the rain comes or suddenly there's a snowstorm. And it turns out that your lesson is really about the weather, right? So you can have some surprises in your experiences, and those can be fun too. Style of communication, definitely. Those are things you can experience. Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples of some experiences that we included in our curriculum. We have 3 sets of modules. One is a train voyage where the students travel across the country. Another is staying with a host family in their apartment. And another one is taking an excursion around a city in the target country. So for each of these, of course, we had our communicative objectives, right? If you remember that slide that I showed you with the communicative objectives and the experiential objectives, of course, every unit had communicative objectives. So for the train voyage, they might be learning to buy things, right? Buy food for their journey. For the host family apartment, they might learn to introduce themselves, right? There were all communicative objectives every step of the way. But we also had experiential objectives. So for example, in the host family apartment, they had to learn to politely get their host mother to stop feeding them. So they would, you can see the kids in this picture having a experiential meal with their host family where the teacher pretends to be their host mother in the apartment. And they need to find a way to get her to stop trying to give them food, right? They want to stop eating, and how can they politely get her to stop? So different kinds of experiences. You can see we have a clown here from our excursions in the city. We visited the circus, and the lower picture at the bottom, we went to an amusement park, and we did that by showing a video of a roller coaster and setting the kids in roles as if they were in roller coasters and having this experience. The way that each lesson is organized in order to have the experience of the observation and then the participation and then internalization and dissemination is by first having an introduction where they're introduced to the concept of the interaction. So they might see a video of a meal in the target culture. They might see a video of a circus. They might look at some pictures of different things that you would see on an excursion in town, and be introduced to those ideas, as well as the language that goes along with it. Next, they engage in a role play. So you can see here we have our staff member dressed up as a clown, and he was selling tickets for the circus. So the kids treated him as if he were a circus employee. They bought and sold the tickets from them, and they actually had this experience as if they were going to the circus in real life. And then the third lesson, project work, they would do things like write a blog about their experience, write a postcard home, make a poster for the circus. So some kind of project work that allows them to internalize and share this information with others. You can see an example here of a guest blog post. And again, we're a Russian language immersion camp. So here they are writing guest blog posts in Russian about their experience with their pretend visit to their host family in Russia. Whoops. That's not where we want to go. Okay, so I talked to you about an experiential curriculum for a language class. So taking your language objectives and figuring out what kind of experiences could allow you to do those language objectives, and having a sequence of lessons that allows students to be exposed and then participate and then internalize and disseminate. The other way that we can approach experiential language learning in a children's camp is through camp activities, like regular camp activities that you would do at a regular children's camp, not an English camp, just a regular camp. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about what you think that might be. What kind of activities do you think of when you think of camp? What do you think children think about and want to do at camp? Um, and we talked about our goals of developing children physically and emotionally. What activities do that? What ideas do you have? Oh, I see some in the chat. Hiking. Yep, definitely. That will develop them physically, that they would be in nature, right? Great camp activity. Sport competitions, rafting. Ooh, fun. Yes. So these are some great examples of things that kids might do at camp. Swimming, definitely. Drama playing, all kinds of art activities, intellectual games, sure. Yeah, all kinds of different fun things that kids might be intrinsically interested in, right? Um, so, oh, we got one more in here. Things that build emotional intelligence, sure, cooperative activities, different kinds of sport, fishing, Yeah, these are great ideas about things that we might do at children's camps. So how do we make this into an experiential language learning activity? We can map language on top of it. So let me give you some examples. These are some examples from Forest Camp, which is an English language camp that I work with in Russia. Um, and so they have one of their activities is archery, for example. Um, but you could use as an example rafting or hiking or fishing or anything else. And then sometimes we have big all camp activities, big games, right? So one of these big all camp activities they do is a haunted camp, a haunted house. Um, and so then the question is, how do you do the language part, right? Here, it's clear how you do the experience part, right? They learn how to do archery. Great. You have some archery instructor who knows all of the skills of archery and how to teach it. But how do you integrate language, right? Or having a haunted camp, great. You can have some stations. They can be scared by different monsters. Wonderful. How is language involved, right? Um, so in this case, we want to start not with our language outcomes, but with our activity outcomes. So we want to look at, if you're an archery expert, tell me, what is it that someone needs to know to do archery well, right? So in this case, maybe accurately shoot an arrow, right? And then we think about what language can emerge from that. Well, maybe prepositions, right? Maybe we can talk about my arrow is above her arrow. My arrow is inside the circle, right? What language makes sense to talk about when you're trying to learn to accurately shoot an arrow? And then we want to make sure that that's attached to our youth development outcomes. So what youth development outcome could this support? Maybe persistence, maybe that emotional skill of trying even when something is hard. Because I don't know if any of you have ever done archery, but the first time you shoot the arrow, probably it doesn't even go all the way to the target, right? It goes somewhere totally wrong. And you have to try many times to get it correct. So this can help build students' persistence. So to get an idea of what the whole trajectory of experiential language learning looks like with something like archery, in the exposing step, you're demonstrating, right, how to shoot the arrow, and you're modeling the related language. Oh, my arrow is inside the bullseye. Oh, my arrow is outside the bullseye. Oh, my arrow is far away from the bullseye, right? We could talk about the location of our arrow for a long time. Um, then we have the students participate. So they'll shoot the arrow, they'll model the language use. And then we have the internalizing step, which for activity-based learning like this, usually looks like a debriefing step. So you've shot all of your arrows, you had a good time, and then you talk to the students and say, okay, what did you learn? What do you need to do if you want your arrow to be inside the bullseye, if you want it to be close to the bullseye? You need to hold it steady, you need to pull it back straight, right? So we learn about what makes us successful here. And then you have the disseminating step. And one thing that's great to do with the disseminating step is to have a group teach the next group. So you're not going to teach archery usually to 50 kids at once, maybe 3 or 4 kids at once, right? We want to be safe. So those 3 or 4 kids can then participate in the demonstration step for the next group, and that can be their dissemination. All right. So that is what I have prepared to talk to you about today for experiential language learning at children's camps. But remember that these are all things that you can do in the classroom too. You have less time, so you have to be really careful to think about picking maybe a very small kind of experience that you can handle within the amount of time that you have in a classroom. Probably you should not do archery in your classroom, but you can do it with crafts, you can do it with games, as long as you think about something that will work within the time and the space constraints that you have in your classroom. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm available for any questions that you might have.
Yeah, thank you very much, Laura. It's such an interesting topic you just presented today, and we together explored the different way how to make this happen. So very interesting. Now we are also encouraging our participants to ask their questions in the chat box and on Facebook. It's kind of very interesting to know based on your own experience, Lara, because we know that in practical terms sometimes what are the difficulties in terms of running the summer camps, because I know that the context is different, but what can you share from your own experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it depends a lot on your context. If you're coming, so first there's setting up the summer camp, and then there's running it once it already exists. And so I don't have much experience with creating a summer camp. I was lucky to start running one that had already been in existence. So I can talk about that. I would say that communicating with parents is probably the most challenging aspect. You have to pay a lot of attention because they're giving you their most precious people. And at our camp, we don't allow cell phones. So they are trusting you to have no contact with their children for a long time and to take care of them. So we really need to spend a lot of time communicating with them. I think the other challenge is staff training, because this is not a long duration of employment, and usually your staff are very young, right? Like university students who don't have much teaching experience. So every summer you have to prepare to teach young people from zero. And you have to provide a lot of support with curriculum and materials, because of course it's unreasonable to expect that an 18-year-old or 19-year-old with no teaching experience could develop everything from the beginning. So I would say those are the two things that are challenging, but also very rewarding. When you build a good relationship with parents and they really trust you, when you help young teachers to start out in the field, it's very exciting and rewarding.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, the questions are popping up, so I'll be reading them aloud to you. What was the most challenging part in your experience? Like, as a camp director, or just, while developing your curriculum?
Yeah, I think as a camp director, the most challenging thing is you have never seen it all. I have been a camp director for 15 years. Every summer, I think maybe this is the summer where there will be no new problems. Everything will be something that I have done before. But children always surprise you. Nature surprises you. Life surprises you. And so every summer, there's something new and interesting that's a challenge. And that can be enjoyable, but it can also be tiring. And it can be frustrating when you have exciting plans for kids in the camp and then things interrupt them. In terms of curriculum development, I think one of the challenges is camps are sort of a one-shot deal. So you develop your curriculum during the year, you take it to camp, you try it out, and then you sort of have to wait a whole year to make improvements to it. And so the lack of time that you have during camp to make some of those course corrections that when you're teaching in a school, you can go home at night and have some time to change your lesson plan for tomorrow. But at camp, you're working all the time, so you don't always have time to make those changes.
I see. Yeah, thanks a lot. We have also just, a couple of more questions. Could you please tell us the easiest method of teaching English to the kids? So probably like how you do that in your camps.
Yeah, so obviously there's lots of different methods, and I would advocate for using different methods because different things will work with different kids. So I think one thing that's very important is to have a high percentage of target language use. So at our camp, we try to be 90 or 95% in the target language. So I think that's one thing that's really important is having rich input and consistent, comprehensible input for kids. And really working hard to make that comprehensible, whether it's through gestures or illustrations or use of cognates or scaffolding on previously learned material. I think for successfully teaching English in a camp environment where the kids are spending their whole day there, making sure that they get a lot of input and that input is really comprehensible and not frustrating and not scary and not overwhelming. I think those are really the most important things to make your teaching experience easier.
Yeah, excellent. So, okay, so now the next question. In camp, some children make friends or come with their friends and do not want to work with a new group of people. How do you manage that?
That is a really great question. So to me, that speaks to some of those youth development outcomes, right? The social aspect of youth development outcomes. And so if you set up systems within your camp where students have some kind of motivation to do that, or it's just part of the camp. At our camp, for example, they have a cabin where they live, and that's by age and gender. And then they have a language class, which is by language proficiency. And then they also have a group that we call their family group, which has different ages, different genders, different language proficiencies. And so just as part of the camp schedule, the kids are in all three of these groups. And I think, I've seen camps where kids are always in their atriad, right? In their like one group. And they only know the kids in their one group. And the little cliques start to develop. But if you intentionally provide settings so that they can have new social groups, if you think about that intentionally as an aspect of social development for your camp and create schedules and groupings that make that happen, that's one way to deal with it. That's sort of the proactive way. And then the reactive way, if they start making those clicks instead, even despite all of your good planning, there's a lot of team building activities that you can do to help to mix kids up and build relationships with new kids. And that could be the topic of a whole different workshop, but intentional team building strategies.
That's fantastic. Like, I wish to participate in one of your camps someday. Maybe whenever you come to Tajikistan, you will help to organize one.
I would love to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. So we have another question, like, could you speak more about how to host family visits?
Okay, so these are all pretend, right? These are imaginary. We don't really travel to Russia and visit a host family, right? We just pretend. So for the host family curriculum, on the first day, they meet their host family, and we set up one of the buildings, one of the rooms in one of the buildings like an apartment. So it has a bed, it has a table, it has a television, teapots. We put a carpet on the wall. It looks like your host family apartment might look. We really, really tried to make it authentic. And so um, on your first day, you walk into this apartment and you're greeted by your host mother and your host father and your host brother, and they introduce themselves and they ask who you are. Um, and so, introductions are sort of the topic that day. The next day, they want to serve you a meal. So we're asking what kind of food we like or don't like. We're learning to politely say that we've had enough food. American students always have this challenge when they go to Russia that they don't know how to make the people stop giving them food. So this is a major objective for us that day. Then the next day, your host mom has lost something in the apartment. I think usually we do a new kitten, and we use a toy kitten. We have a toy kitten that makes noises and walks, right? So we hide it somewhere in the apartment. And so they're learning the vocabulary about the furniture and things in the apartment by helping the host mom to find the missing cat. And they look under things and inside things and on top of things. Let's see, the next day they go to the daya, and so they learn about plants. We're at a camp, so we want to learn about nature, right? So the host family takes you on a nature walk, and then you go to the garden and you plant some dill and some parsley and things like that. So yeah, there are other topics, but that's basically how the host family visit curriculum progresses. How do you assess children's progress throughout the program? That's great. So with these programs, so you remember the third lesson, the dissemination step was a blog or a vlog. So every other day the groups switch. One day group one is making a vlog, a video, and group two is writing a blog. And then the next day they switch and group one writes the blog and group two makes the video, right? And so we use those products to assess their progress. And so they pretend like they are making a video to talk about their experience, right? To share with their family back at home in America. And so then we use their products there to assess their language. A formative assessment is pretty informal. It's just based on I mean, it's all formative on the one hand. This is not like a graded program. It's not a school where I have someone, who who's going to report grades and the students have to pass to another level. So in this particular program, it's really all formative assessment.
And how do you just, communicate the progress of the kids, with their parents?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, we post the vlogs and the blogs on our website so parents can see. And when we do the blog, usually we'll have a picture of the group that wrote it so they can see who that is. And that's actually one of the best things about this curriculum is that it serves those two purposes. It provides that experience for the kids, and that gives us assessment material. So really three purposes, and it also serves as something we can communicate to parents. And then it's a 2-week program. So in the middle, they get an email with a specific progress report on their child, and at the end, they get an email with a specific progress report on their child. Great questions.
An experience of building leadership skills, or building like global citizenship skills, with youth, because this are kind of a trendy stuff, and also they help like to identify and also just to develop their future potential.
Yeah, no, great question. And actually, global citizenship is the main goal of our camp. We're part of a network of 15 different language camps. And the overall mission of the camps is to develop global citizenship skills. So one way that we look at developing global citizenship skills is we want to build citizenship skills for students in the
Mm-hmm.
cabin, in the camp, and in the
Mm,
world. So the cabin, their small
yeah.
living group, the camp as a whole, and then how that translates to the world. So we teach them language for things like conflict resolution in
Mm,
the cabin. So even the most beginner students know the questions, what happened, what can we do, what will
mm,
we do? And we teach them to solve the problem by saying what happened and then brainstorming a lot of ideas about what can we do and then deciding with the people they had the conflict with, what will we do? So that's an example of how we teach global citizenship skills just as part of life at camp. And of course, there are many conflicts, so we have many chances to use this and they get a lot of practice. But then we also do things like a model
mm,
UN. Um, so, um, and how you use language, that depends on, of course, the level of the students. Because our camp's primary goal is global citizenship and language is actually a secondary goal, we typically will do the Model UN at least part in the student's native language, so that all students have an opportunity to participate. So students who are more proficient will do it all in the target language. Less proficient will do it in English, but learn so their native language, but learn
mm.
keywords in the target language, so that they're progressing in language, but it's still accessible to them.
Yeah, okay. So another question is, how long is usually your camp period?
Um, we have 1, 2, and 4 week
Mm,
programs.
excellent. So, and we have
Yeah.
one more question. What is the weakness? What is the weakest part of the children during camping?
Oh, it really depends on the child. You know, some students come in with no language and that's their weakness. Some kids have never been away from home and that's hard for them. Some have never had to share a space with other kids before. Um, some of them have difficulty with ambiguity, right? With not understanding the schedule may change. And it's an immersion setting, and if they're beginners, they, some beginners are comfortable and they're okay, they'll tell me where to go, when to go, I don't have to worry. But some get very
Mm,
nervous, right, if they don't understand all the words. So it really depends on the child.
yeah, yeah, just very interesting. Like, I have another question. So can you tell more about like, how you do supporting language learners, and how do you support language learners with disabilities? Because this is something like, we had some initiative in Tajikistan, some of organization organized some kind of camps, summer camps for kids with disability. But in our setting, it's kind of a little bit difficult, taking into consideration that not all the infrastructure is accessible and is not like just user friendly with the people with disabilities. And in your experience, how was that?
Yeah, I think we have to consider what we're talking about when we talk about students with disabilities. So there's a range of visible and invisible disabilities. When we think about students with disabilities, sometimes we think only about a student who uses a wheelchair or a
Mm-hmm.
student who is deaf or has a vision impairment. But we can also think about students who have a learning disability, or who have autism, but not to the extent that their movement, or their speech, has difficulty, but it may affect the way they interact with their environment, right? So the ways that you support these participants, of course, are very different. The disabilities are all very different. And even if you know what a person's disability is, um, they often show up differently in different individuals. So just because you know a student has autism, that doesn't necessarily mean that you know how that particular student needs to be supported. So the first thing that I start with when looking at how to support individuals with disabilities is what that particular student's need for access is. And it's really important to go to the family, the child, um, and see what their actual needs are rather than proceeding on, oh, I think blind students need this, right? Of course, there are some things that everyone will need, like for blind students, they will need to have places where they can walk safely, right? But it may look differently for different students. Some students might use a cane, some may be partially sighted, and some might prefer a human guide, some may have a dog, many different possibilities. I think this would be another topic that I would be happy to do a longer workshop on, because it really is so specific for all of the different disabilities. But I would say the number one thing is start with talking to the family and the child about what their needs are, and focus on inclusion. So if you can't find a way to make an activity inclusive so that all students can participate in some way, then find a different activity. It's always possible to find something.
Yeah, just we definitely need to organize another webinar with you because like you provide so many just very nice insights, about how to run and how just to make a very interesting content based on different needs of the groups of learners. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. Sure. So another question, how do you handle and endure with large group of the kids?
So at camp in particular, we have around 100 kids, and you deal through routines and rituals. So we teach the kids on day one certain call and response, like maybe, for example, the call and response, 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. So otherwise you spend all of your time saying, everyone be quiet, right? And that's not fun. The students feel attacked, right? You feel very angry. So we come up with fun routines and rituals to engage the kids. And it can be as simple as a silly or fun way of saying good morning, right? So we could say good morning opera style and sing it, or you could say good morning underwater style, and then the kids repeat it back that way, right? So that's one way to handle large groups, is through teaching these calls and response that help them to become engaged without needing to, be very strict. We also have different kinds of behavioral incentives. So the groups can get prizes for being helpful in taking care of the environment or helping each other out. So using some of that competition in a positive way geared towards citizenship. And then dividing into smaller groups and making sure that counselors are responsible for each of those groups. So there are very few times when one person has to handle the large group. We have the staff all know what smaller groups they're responsible for each time. And depending on your budget, it doesn't have to be staff. It could be senior campers who get some kind of leadership training and can be responsible for their peers.
Yeah, just very, very interesting. Thank you, Lara. And the last question that we have today from our participants. Did you have a camp during lockdown, and how did the COVID change the way you run the camps?
Yeah, great question. So last summer we had virtual camp, and it was just a wild experience to try to transform camp into something on your computer. But it turned out to be very fun. We learned a lot about what works well on the computer and what needs to be totally different. But the kids had a good time and we enjoyed it. And we're probably going to continue doing that in addition to our regular camp in the future. This summer, we will be having camp in person. We are running at half capacity is the major change. And then also, we will not be able to have the mixed groups that we usually have. So I said before, usually we have the cabin and the class and the family group. And this summer, we will probably have just one group or maybe two, definitely not three, because of course we don't want all of those groups mixing all the time. But now that we have good access to vaccines, even for children as young as 12 in the US, we're hoping that that most of our participants will be vaccinated and that it won't affect us too much. But
Yeah.
COVID always brings us surprises. So
Yeah,
we'll
yeah,
see what
definitely.
happens next.
Yeah, it's just you always just plan how to adapt, how to be flexible, and
Yeah.
how just not to halt, but rather just develop under the new circumstances. Yeah,
Yes.
thank you very much. It's just another just great opportunity for us today to learn from your experience, Lara. So so many and very deep insights as well as suggestions. And I think that today our audience got a very useful tips and also recommendations for you for organizing something similar in the context of Tajikistan. Thank you very much, Lara.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, just, yeah, we will share all the materials, including your presentation and the links you shared with us on our website, English Without Borders. And please stay tuned on us. And using this moment, I convey a deep gratitude of all the participants, both on Facebook and Zoom. We already have a bunch of thank you notes here. So thank you very much, Lara. And yeah, hope to see you again. And just a reminder for our participants, please hurry up and submit your application because we have extended the application period for the Innovative English Teacher Award till July 15th. So please apply. You will be among the winners who will receive very nice smartphones and also be invited to the English Without Borders National Conference, which is going to happen in the fall. We keep the fingers crossed the situation with COVID will be better soon, yeah, globally and also in Tajikistan. Yeah, thank you very much. And it was very, very enjoyable to have you and to host you today and to receive so interesting recommendations from you. Thank you very much.